Live from the Washington, D.C. area, it's the Inside Scoop, Emerald Planet. All the ecology news that our viewers want to know. Now, here's your host, Executive Director of the Emerald Planet, Dr. Sam Lee Hancock.
Welcome to the Emerald Planet as we come to you from Washington, D.C. in the United States as we look around the globe in 144 different nations. We're looking for the 1,000 best practices, technologies, services, and products that are making a difference as we move through the 21st century. And as we have 9 billion people on the planet by 2050, how are we going to be able to provide everything that's needed, the food, the fuel, the fiber, all the basic infrastructure, so that people have an increased quality of life and not just existing. And we have someone who's actually doing this, experimenting at the same time on her own property. This is Cleo Braver. She's the owner and operator of Cottingham Farm, which is in Talbot County, out in the eastern shore of Maryland in the United States. Cleo is coming in to us off of iPhone, and so hopefully we'll have her photograph up here in a few minutes that you can see her. Cleo, welcome to the Emerald Planet TV. Cleo? Cleo, hello?
Hello?
Yes, there you are. I thought I'd lost you. I was introducing you and talking about Talbot County and the eastern shore of Maryland. So welcome and glad to have you on Emerald Planet TV.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad to participate.
Yeah, we're glad to have you. Cleo, tell us a little bit about Cottingham Farm. What is special about it? And then also a little bit about the beautiful location in Talbot County out in the eastern shore of Maryland.
Well, Cottingham Farm is in Talbot, as you say, right on the banks of the Goldsboro Creek of the Miles River that feeds into the Eastern Bay, that feeds into the very well-known Chesapeake Bay. And I live out there with my husband. We enjoyed our farm in a very passive way. We were gentlemen farmers, and now I'm a farmer.
That's fantastic.
We decided that we wanted to make a change on our farm. It was farmed in conventional grain, as is the predominant, the vast majority of the millions of Maryland acres are farmed in conventional grain. This is feed corn and feed soy that go to feed CAFO chickens. Some of your viewers may not know what that means, confined animal feed operations. And so that's really basically what the agriculture is in the state of Maryland and on Delmarva, and really in a lot of the country. And we wanted to do something different on our farm because we kind of came to believe from looking at the science that this kind of agriculture can be destructive to the Chesapeake Bay and to animal health and public health. And so we started farming the land ourselves.
Cleo, tell us a little bit about some of the changes that you actually made on your farm, and then what are the differences that you're seeing on your farm as far as the land and the area that immediately surrounds the area, because you actually live on your own farm?
Well, so some of the changes that we made were we suspended the planting of corn and soy on the farm. We instead moved to vegetables and pastured animals. We like to call it food rather than feed. We engage in true rotations, for vegetable families, animals, cover crops. We're certified organic, so we moved to get certified under the USDA organic program. The Department of Agriculture in our state is our certifier. And we've just with the changes that we've made, we've seen in our fields, increased organic matter from less than 0.5%, which is abysmally low, to 5% in some of the fields and even as high as 8%. We no longer have 4-foot deep erosion ditches in our fields. We no longer see huge sheets of water leaving our farm fields and going into these drainage ditches, which are designed to carry water off of farm fields and really over most of Delmarva Peninsula carry them the water, the sediment, the nutrients, the nitrogen, the phosphorus, the pollutants, the fertilizers, the synthetic fertilizers, the pesticides. They carry them right off the fields, along the drainage ditches that you see along the flatland and into the Chesapeake Bay and its tributaries. So we no longer see that water flow coming off of the farm. And as a result of putting in about 50 acres of wetlands and buffer strips and riparian tree buffers along the water's edge and lots of organic cover crops, we see a lot of disappearing species on the farm now. So it provides habitat and it also buffers the Chesapeake Bay. So
Cleo, what you're saying is that you've seen profound changes on your farm since you took it out of in essence, a monoculture or cultures, corn and soybeans, and now you've gone over to organic vegetables and other kinds of crops. But you've made profound changes to the land and the surroundings through all these buffers and sequester the water on site, correct?
We have, and we've even seen greater changes in this last year when we've just integrated animals into the crop production. So we have pastured hogs and pastured chickens, and you really start to work with Mother Nature rather than against her when you start doing these things. So it's been rewarding to see, and we'd love to see other landowners do the same thing with their farms.
That's absolutely fantastic. Tell us a little bit about some of the examples. We were talking about this earlier, the differences with the organic produce that you are creating there, and also this pasture-raised, I guess many people call that free-range beef or whatever animals that you're growing there, and also the chickens with the eggs. Tell us a little bit about that, and how are these that produce actually better for both the people and the land itself?
Well, if you think about it, if you've got no or low inputs of pesticides being applied to the food, you're not going to have pesticide residues in the food. And as an interesting fact, you can significantly reduce and even eliminate pesticides from your body in as little as 7 days. And there's some interesting studies that should be coming out in 2017 to confirm that. So as poorly as you may have eaten all your life, you can actually remove pesticides that quickly. Because there's less pesticides, you're going to end up actually, for that reason and other reasons, having more nutrient density. So as an example, one of the things that plants do as a natural defense against pests is if they produce antioxidants. And if pesticides are being applied, there's no longer a need to produce antioxidants. So antioxidant production slows down. Pastured meat that's living outside in the sun, eating, oats and barley, and eating more natural foods are going to have heart-healthy fats rather than heart-unhealthy fats. You're going to have omega-3s rather than omega-6s. And they're going to have, the pastured eggs will have higher levels of the good cholesterol and lower levels of the bad. They'll have higher levels of vitamins. And that says nothing of the animal welfare issues of having animals being raised in a much more natural way rather than in really kind of destructive, confined operations. And the vast majority of meat, and the vast majority of meat that's sold in American grocery stores, is not pastured. It doesn't live a natural life. It lives in very close quarters. It's required to be given antibiotics to survive the unhealthy living conditions. And there's very high mortality rates in those production systems. So we prefer to see animals living a more natural life, and then we get the benefit of a much better nutrient profile in the foods. But just as importantly as what's in the food that we put in our own bodies, we're not putting pesticides in our community. So it's an important thing, I think, not to be impacting your community and your waterways and drinking water with pesticides and synthetic fertilizers.
Yeah, Cleo, tell us a little bit about this is a quote directly came from you. What is important? Where your food is grown, are how your food is grown. So tell us this difference between where your food is grown and how your food is grown. And it seems like you're doing a very good job at that. But let's address this directly. And then I have another question for you, and we're about running out of time.
Okay. So, where your food is grown is important. The average food miles traveled in this country is like 1,500 miles. And for fresh food, and I put that in air quotes, it's 1,200 for general, and for fresh food, it's 1,500 miles. So it's important to get local food because you're cutting down on the carbon emissions associated with that transportation. But even more important, I think, than where it's grown, and that's what the buy local gets to, is how is it grown? So, if it's grown with a lot of pesticides, there's a lot of pesticides in whatever community is growing that food. And so if you only care about where it's grown, you're actually going to be importing into your own community those pesticides that might have been applied in, Canada or Mexico or Florida or California, some community other than Delmarva. So there's a real push to buy local, but that doesn't address the hows of how food is grown. It only addresses where. And, I think it's a moral question, I think, to ask. Are you putting pesticides in your community? Or are you putting pesticides in other communities? And I think it doesn't matter where it is. I think if you're putting pesticides in a community, it's not a particularly good thing. It is possible to grow food without pesticides, and that's, I think, how we should be growing it.
Cleo, we're running out of time. I got 2 last questions, right quick. How can we transform the food system? Take about 20, 30 seconds for that, and I have one last question. But we got to be quick.
Well, I tell you, I can answer that one really quickly. We can transform the food system either by having enlightened lawmakers that subsidize sustainable food production practices and stop subsidizing unsustainable food production practices, or we can have informed landowners who decide that they want to have healthy food production on their lands rather than unhealthy, or without either one of those two, we can totally transform the food system with growing season or 2 by just exercising our power as eaters, and I think most Americans eat food.
Yeah.
We can vote with our forks 3 times a day. We can seek out organic or low input foods versus conventional. We can seek out pastured or grass-fed or free-range foods rather than the typical confined animals that are sold in grocery stores.
Thank you. This is Cleo Braver. She's the owner and operator of Cottingham Farm, Talbot County, Eastern Shore of Maryland. Thank you for being with us as we learn how we can transform our farms as we create the Emerald Planet.
Every time I hear the alarm bell go off in school, I think it's an air raid.
A lot of houses in our neighborhood have been destroyed. I like to close my ears and sing songs whenever the bombs come close.
I'm worried our new neighbors won't like us.
But I know it's all gonna be worth it. I just want my family to be safe. But these are not my words.
These are not my words.
These are not my words.
Smoke before you give it a try. Only you. Don't play with matches. Don't play with fire. Cause there's nothing very funny about life. Nothing very nice on a homeless mind. So if a gorgeous force is what you desire, don't play with matches. Don't play with fire. Only you can prevent wildfires. Fire.
How far would you go to protect the planet?
I want you to build an ark.
Here we go. Okay, that's good. Oh, okay. Ow!
Maybe there's another way.
People, the flood is imminent.
Is it too much to ask for a little precipitation?
Go to fightglobalwarming.com to find out what you and your community can do to reduce global warming pollution.
When it comes to saving money,
What?
don't act like a baby.
Oh, it's like they're having their own little meeting.
This is so humiliating.
Be the boss
I'm the boss.
What the?
Power nap.
You were saying.
and make a budget.
Let's get to work.
Need a little help?
Stacy, read back the notes.
I can't read. What's it say?
Create a personalized savings plan and get other tools and tips
We can share.
You obviously didn't go to business school.
at feedthepig.org.
We're back to the Inside Scoop Emerald Planet. Here again, your host, Dr. Sam.
Hello, welcome to the Emerald Planet as we come to you from Washington, D.C. in the United States, as we're looking around the globe for what we call the 1,000 best practices, the best of the best. Those best practices that are making a difference as we add 2 billion new people to the planet by 2050. And by 2050, how we're going to be able to provide all the food, the fuel, the fiber, everything that's needed for these people so that not only are they existing, but having an increased quality of life. And I have someone that's coming on. She's coming in by iPhone at an international conference. This is Dr. Kristine Nichols. She's a chief scientist and research director for the Rodale Institute. And Dr. Nichols, I think you're with me.
Yes.
Welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be with you.
I'm glad to have you, and thank you for being here. You're doing outstanding work, and we have, hopefully here soon, we'll have your logo up. But tell us a little bit about your organization, the Rodale Institute, and its mission and its vision.
Well, Rodale Institute is a private nonprofit, and it was started in the 1940s. And basically, the idea behind this, our founder, J.I. Rodale, was trying to find out a way to be able to provide healthy food for his family. He was originally from New York City, and he bought a farm in rural Pennsylvania and brought his family there, and he wanted to be able to provide them with nutritious, healthy food. And when he was going and discussing with university researchers, they were telling him that to grow food, you needed to put in various types of chemicals. And he was actually in manufacturing. He manufactured electrical switches. And he said, well, if I'm going to have the best switches, I need to have the best products to be able to create those switches. And he didn't understand how you could use poisons to be able to create healthy food.
Well, I tell you, one thing that you're doing is that you're doing advanced research through the Rodale Institute, and so it really came out of the founder's insistence that he wanted to have the best of the best, not only for his own industry, but also for the food he was feeding his family. Is that what I'm understanding?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, he wanted to make sure that he had the best food. And so he utilized the money that he got from the manufacturing that he did and started a publishing company, which is Rodale Inc. And then he started this private nonprofit research, outreach, and education farm that is looking at how you're going to be able to grow healthy food, not just to feed an individual family, but to feed the world.
And looking at this, I have the original, what looks like the site, if I can bring this slide back up. If I can bring this slide back up, show this.
Okay.
This is 1970, and this looks like what you have today. This is just absolutely incredible, the difference between these two areas. And looking at 1970, and now we're over to 2017. So looking at that, what does carbon sequester mean? And it seems like this is what you're doing. And how does that magnify climate change?
Well, what we're trying to do and what we've done with the farm since 1970 is putting carbon back into the soil where the carbon belongs. And when you have carbon in the soil, it allows for the minerals that the plants need to be able to grow will bind to that carbon, and then they'll be available to the plants when the plants need them when they're growing on the field. It also, by having carbon in the soil, it's going to be able to help water when it rains or when snow melts. That water is going to get into the soil much more quickly, and it's then going to be held in the soil for a longer period of time. So the carbon that you're going to put in there, when you want to sequester carbon, you want to make sure that that carbon that you're putting into the soil, and you're not really putting it in, it's the plants. The plants produce carbon through photosynthesis, so they take CO2 from the atmosphere and convert it into sugars, and those sugars then provide the building blocks and the energy for all of the cells in the plants. And they also, the sugars are essentially given or sold to the organisms in the soil in exchange for minerals and nutrients that the plants need from that soil environment. And when you want to sequester carbon, you want to make sure that that carbon is going to stay in the soil, not just from year to year, but actually for decades and even centuries.
Well, looking at this image that you have here, this is intriguing, the image that you have, because what you're saying is that through photosynthesis, you're bringing in the carbon dioxide, you're of course producing oxygen, but actually you're taking and converting to sugars, and in a sense you have like a little marketplace going on here, and you're sending that down to all the anaerobic and aerobic bacteria that's in the soil that we need to increase the quality of the soil. Is that what we're understanding through this image that we have here?
Exactly. We're regenerating the soil, regenerating the landscape above ground by actually taking that CO2 from the atmosphere and putting that below ground. And that's going to help to mitigate climate change because we're reducing the CO2 greenhouse gas.
Now, in measuring what is going on, how do you measure this sequestering of the carbon? How do you realize how much is actually going there? And then why do we need to know that?
Well, one of the things that we do is we work with a number of researchers and farmers in order to be able to measure what they refer to as organic matter. And organic matter, about half of organic matter is carbon. And so by measuring organic matter that's in your soils, you're able to know how much carbon you're going to be able to store in those soils. And it's really important to be able to take a look at that, because that's going to tell you, again, how you're going to be able to regenerate those soils and be able to hold on to more water and be able to hold on to the nutrients that are needed by the plants.
This is intriguing. You have this interactive carbon economy, and I like the way you're doing this. I don't know if you're a scientist by background, an economist, or both, but I like this juxtaposition of this interactive carbon economy. So what are the best management practices as far as being able to take carbon and put it and keep it in the soil, but at the same time to mitigate climate change?
Well, and it's very much that carbon economy that you said, and really this is how all organisms function, and even how we used to function. We used to barter and trade for food. That was how civilizations evolved, were barter and trade systems based on food. Now we use money to do that, but really it's that idea, in the same way that the plants are interacting with the organisms in the soil in order to have this barter and trade type of system. And the more that the plants are going to rely on the soil and the organisms that are in the soil, the less that you're going to have some of the greenhouse gases like CO2 that's going to go into the organisms in the soil, but also the less that you're going to have things like methane and nitrous oxide coming off of the surface of the soil and contributing to climate change.
Well, our farmers have been putting on chemical fertilizers since the agricultural revolution, going back to right after World War II, the 40s, the 50s, 60s, even into the 70s, and then using great amounts of insecticides and pesticides, very dangerous and harmful chemicals. So what you're saying is that, in a sense, even though we were producing increasing amount of food, we're actually poisoning the soil, which now is leading in many countries like in China, India, Brazil, South Africa, even the United States, is that the land now is actually producing less food per acre because of all these harsh chemicals that we're using in the past. Would that be a true statement?
Exactly. What we've done with the chemical-based agriculture, we thought that we needed to apply all of those chemicals, like you said, in the 40s in order to be able to maintain and increase food production. This happened a lot around World War II because we had less farmers. Many of the young men went off to war, and some of them unfortunately didn't come back, but even those that returned, they didn't want to go back to working on the farm and working in agriculture. And so you had, again, this continuation of fewer farmers, so we had to produce more food per acre. And we thought that the chemicals were a way to do that. But when we were doing that, we actually stole the job, essentially, from the organisms that are in the soil. We outsourced their jobs to the chemicals, and so those organisms, their population started to decline, and then we started to apply more and more pesticides that would kill many of those organisms, both the organisms in the soil and pesticides like insecticides that kill many of the beneficial organisms that are not just in the soil, but are on the surface of the soil and in the atmosphere. And so we continue to decrease those populations, and that's had a very negative impact on our ability to continue to grow food, because now we're going to have to add more and more and more nutrients and more and more and more pesticides to manage what nature has done for almost 500 million years. Nature has worked on creating these systems that can do this level of food production for us in the most efficient manners possible.
Dr. Nichols, I need to stop you here. We're going on, we're running out of time. I want to go to this water efficiency in the soil, and we only have about 30 seconds to do all this. So tell us about water efficiency and how by doing this all naturally, organically, it's much better for the soil, the farmers, and ultimately the consumers. And we got about 30 seconds.
Okay, well, what we've found is that, and I'm sure you're looking at some of the images that show the fact that in our organic systems, we can actually have systems that are resilient against drought, that are resilient against the lack of water. Because we're utilizing that water more efficiently by the organisms that are in the soil that have, again, co-evolved over this time to create those efficient mechanisms, as well as improving the infiltration rate of the water so that when it rains or snow melt, that water is going to go into the soil as opposed to running off the surface.
This is Dr. Kristine Nichols. She is a chief scientist and research director for Rodale Institute. Thank you for being with us. We talk about nature as we create the Emerald Planet.
So, same time next week?
Well, of course. Put away a few bucks, feel like $1 million. For free tips to help you save, go to Feed the Pig.
I dare you. I dare you to change the world. Yeah, you. Getting that college education. I dare you to be somebody important. Like be a teacher. Or a reality TV star. I dare you to stand up here. To call the shots. To be a role model.
An inspiration. An innovator.
To be a teacher.
Think you can change my life?
Make me excited about science like you. Have a career that really means something? Then do it. I dare you.
They say you don't have to be so strong. But this is my mother, my purpose. Strength is not optional. See, I lift her now like she raised me then. So I know my strength is super, but I'm still human.
Oh, look who's here.
to the Inside Scoop Emerald Planet. Here again, your host, Dr. Sam.
Hello and welcome to the Emerald Planet as we come to you on a week-to-week basis looking around the globe for those 1,000 best practices, but also we're looking for people that are the thought leaders all over the world. Thought leaders are helping to create a new planet as we go back to rediscover things that people knew maybe even as far as 6,000 to 10,000 years ago. And now we're finding out again as we have a very mechanized, industrialized, and chemical-based agricultural industry that maybe we need to go back and discover things that we've lost, truths that we need to relearn, and at the same time, techniques that maybe that we thought were old or quaint, and now we need to go back and rediscover those as the earth is changing. We have severe climate change. Everything around us is changing, so maybe we need to go back and see what we need to be doing instead of just constantly trying to push forward, or a combination of these two. And I have someone is actually doing this. You see her image right over my shoulder. This is Dr. Kristine Nichols. She's a chief scientist and research director at the Rodale Institute, doing absolutely incredible work. And she's coming on actually by iPhone. And Dr. Nichols, welcome back to the Emerald Planet TV.
Thank you very much. It's good to be here.
Yeah, glad to have you, and thank you for sharing this. I want to start off, if we can, put up this first image here. It's something that's called the interactive carbon economy. And tell us a little bit about your research and a little bit of the history as far as the Rodale Institute that really led you into this line of inquiry, and at the same time practice so that we can present to the world maybe a new old or old new way of doing things that may be better for the earth, at the same time to address severe climate change.
Well, thank you. Yeah, at the Rodale Institute, we're a private nonprofit institution, and we do research, outreach, and education. And what we're trying to do there is look at these ways in which we can utilize, as you said, some old technology, but actually utilize new ideas and new concepts by applying some of these older methods, where we're going to look at this carbon economy where CO2 from the atmosphere goes into the plants and through photosynthesis becomes sugars, and those sugars are then paid to bacteria and fungi and other organisms in the soil that help to provide the nutrients and water that the plants need to be able to grow.
Now, looking at this, and this is something you and I have talked about before, but I want to go back to this. This is very profound, particularly this image that we have here. And I like the way that you've done this about this interactive carbon economy. One is that, you know, we have severe climate change, even though there are very few people that are still denying that today. And at the same time, we have increased releases of carbon into the atmosphere. But it seems like that you have found a way, and this is something that goes back from eons ago, to actually sequester that carbon in the soil to increase the quality of the food and also the amount, but decrease the cost through using less chemical fertilizers, insecticides, and pesticides. So tell us about this interaction. And I'm leaving this slide up here of this interactive carbon economy, and just let you go forth on this.
Okay. Well, what we have is, again, the plants that are going to make these sugars by taking the CO2, and those sugars are then going to be paid to organisms like bacteria that will take nitrogen from the atmosphere and to gas and convert that into ammonia and nitrates, and those are nitrogen forms that the plants are going to take up for their own growth. And then you also have bacteria that can help to release phosphorus that may be bound to minerals in the soil and provide that phosphorus to the plants so that the plants can get the adequate nutrition that they need to be able to grow. You also have organisms like fungi that can break down and release some of the nutrients, and other fungi like mycorrhizal fungi that actually act as a conduit where they take carbon from the plants and then go out there and work with other bacteria and fungi and pay them carbon that they got from the plant, and they pay then for the nutrients from the soil, and then they will carry those nutrients back inside the plant roots.
Now
so you're really working on this trade.
Yeah, now looking at this, and what you've done is, I think you're saying something that's very amazing to most people who will be watching this, except maybe research scientists like yourself that know this, is that this is a very sophisticated, well-intended community that has been established in the soil. And so by actually paying all this, the bacteria, the fungi, and the other life that's living in the soil, is that we can actually improve the quality of life for all beings above the ground, and at the same time is that we can address severe climate change.
Exactly.
And tell us about that intelligence that's actually there. It's native, we're not creating it, but in some ways it sounds like it's much better organized and much more intelligent than what we humans may think we are.
Well, as you indicated, this has been going on for eons, for well over 400 million years, about 500 million years ago. Before we had plants on land, there was these relationships between microorganisms and algae. And when they then came onto land, they started to utilize more CO2 from the atmosphere, and the single-celled algae would actually become multicellular. And so now we have the origin of plants. And by having this type of a system, it really has, because it's been around for so long, it really has figured out how to do this in the most efficient manner. So when we're trying to add chemicals and synthetic fertilizers and pesticides to the system, we're trying to do the same thing that these organisms have done, but we're using knowledge that we've only had for maybe 50 to 60 years, which seems like a long time, but when you compare that to 500 million years, really we haven't figured out how to do it any more efficiently than the organisms in the soil can do it. So we want to utilize that efficiency to take that CO2, which is going to help to mitigate climate change, because we're now going to draw down CO2 from the atmosphere and feed that to the organisms that are in the soil, and be able to grow the amount of carbon that we have in our soil, so that we're also better at managing water in the system as well.
Now, I have this slide up here, and I want to get into this. We're about halfway through, so we have about 5 minutes to talk about this water use efficiency. And how does carbon aid and abet drawing water into the soil much more efficiently, holding it, and then releasing it as it's needed, so that we're actually increasing the quality of the soil, the life under the ground, and to increase the quality of the plants that are coming up through all that above ground?
Well, one of the main ways in which that carbon contributes is, again, the way that it feeds the life in the soil. So what ends up happening in this system is the organisms that are in the soil, they actually do what's called ecosystem engineering. They create their own habitat. They build structures called soil aggregates. They're pellets in the soil, just small little balls that'll be in the soil. And those pellets come in different shapes and sizes, and as they fit together, they can't fit tightly together, so there's open space in there, and that's what creates the porosity in your soil. And the more porosity that you have, the easier it is for water to be able to move into that soil much more quickly. The other thing that you're going to have with that porosity is you're actually going to keep that water in that pore space, as opposed to it evaporating off of the soil surface because of the energy of the sun, or being pulled by gravity down deeper into the soil where the roots can't reach it. So by keeping that water right next to the roots, it's going to be much more efficient at being able to feed the plant while it's growing.
Now, looking at this, the next slide that you shared with me, you have this, the drought, and you have this corn on the left, which is organic. On the right is conventional, using chemical fertilizers and the various insecticides, pesticides. And the difference between the growth is dramatic, and even the color of the corn itself. Why is that? What's happening here below the ground that we are actually seeing above the ground?
Well, what's happening below the ground in the organic system is, again, it's utilizing those organisms that are in the soil. So it's creating more pore space so that you're getting more water into the soil. But then those organisms that are in the soil are also able to provide the nutrients to the plants that the plants need to grow. So they use the carbon that came from the plant to be able to get those nutrients and deliver those to the plant when the plant needs them. This is basically providing food and water when you have the needs. In a conventional system, what happens is there's less pore space, so there's less water available throughout the growing season. So those plants are entirely reliant upon precipitation patterns, which we know are very uncertain and are becoming even more uncertain with climate change. And at the same time, the nutrition that's added when we add synthetic fertilizers, those nutrients don't stay in the soil in the chemical formulas that the plants can take up for very long. And so what ends up happening is throughout the growing season in a conventional system, the plant starts to starve. Essentially, it's like what we want to do is in a conventional system, they feed the plant, but they feed the plant at the beginning of the season, all of the food that the plant is supposed to need for the whole entire growing season. Basically, you get food for the first couple of weeks, and then you don't get fed anything for the rest of the year. It's very difficult for a plant to be able to manage the food to be able to continue to grow in that system. In the organic system, because the carbon from the plant is used as the payment for the food and helping to form the pellets that are helping to create the porosity for water, that's going to be much more efficient at being able to provide that throughout the growing season when the plant needs to have it.
So what we're seeing here then, and we have absolutely run out of time, and I have one last question, is that the brown is not just the fact of lack of water, it's actually the fact of starvation at the same time it's a lack of water. Is that a truism?
That is very true. Absolutely correct.
Yeah, and we're seeing this as far as the soybean. I'm going to put up your logo here. Tell us, what do you see for the next 5, 10, and 15 years for Rodale Institute, your growth and development? You have about 10 seconds to do all that. Sorry about that.
That's okay. What we're trying to take a look at is not just this idea of being able to mitigate climate change, but also to build resilience. And on top of that, what we were really trying to explore is how we're going to have more nutrient-dense food to be able to feed our growing population.
You know what, guys? There's a lot of tree branches and dry brush over here. We should probably move the bonfire over there.
It is amazing. We're glad to have...
I'm guessing Smokey liked that idea.
Hey, Hard, what's this? That's my resignation. You're resigning? Why? You've been putting me under a lot of pressure lately. That's why I'm ready to quit. Oh, I forgot. I'll do better. Please don't quit on me.
Don't let your heart quit on you. Get your uncontrolled high blood pressure to a healthy range before it's too late.
So you can't save money? That's easy as pie. Brown bagging lunch instead of going out. $6 save times 5 days a week times 10 years is $21,000. That's a lot of lettuce. Small changes today, big bucks tomorrow. Feedthepig.org.
Did you know kids who play outdoors have healthier lungs?
Totally. I did. Did you know that boys that play with dolls make better husbands? My son has lots of dolls.
But did you know terracloth diapers breathe better?
I did. Mm-hmm.
It's totally true.
Oh, yeah.
Did you know that strollers have the right of way on a sidewalk?
Yes.
Yep, I did. Did you guys
Did you know that kids who eat breakfast have higher GPAs?
Yeah, I know.
Yeah. That's actually what I was going to say.
Did you know babies should never touch silver? It's really bad for them.
I knew that. Did you guys know that statistically friendly kids have more friends?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's obvious.
Did you know most people think they're using the right car seat for their kid, but they're not?
Parents who really know it all know for sure that their child is in the right seat at the right age and size. Visit safercar.gov/the-right seat. to make sure your child is protected.
I'm putting that on my blog.
I just put it in mine.
Places, everybody.
Light check. 1, 2, 1, 2.
Everything looks good on our end.
And lights.
Come alive with the forest. Visit discovertheforest.org to find a forest near you.
We're back to the Inside Scoop Emerald Planet. Here again, your host, Dr. Sam.
Hello and welcome to the Emerald Planet TV as we come to you from Washington, D.C. and Washington, capital of the United States, as we're looking around the globe for those 1,000 best practices, technologies, services, and products as we move through the 21st century. And of course, we're looking for those thought leaders, those opinion leaders that are making a difference in many sorts of ways as we face severe climate change, dramatic shifts in temperatures, and at the same time, more droughts, more severe and violent weather events around the globe, and real challenges as far as the production of food and fiber that we need for a planet that's going to 9 billion people by 2050. And we have someone who is a world thought leader in this whole area, Alexis Baden-Meyer. She is a political director for the Organic Consumers Association, headquartered in Washington, D.C. And she's coming on by iPhone, actually. Alexis, are you here?
I am. Thank you for having me.
Well, welcome. And we have both of your logos up here, and we'll talk about that just in a few minutes. But tell us a little bit about this Organic Consumers Association. I have to admit, I've not heard of your association before. And tell us a little bit about it. And how does that relate to what's called Regeneration International?
Organic Consumers Association is a movement of people who have figured out that the best way to be healthy and save the planet at the same time is to eat organic food. Our organization got started in the late 1990s by advocating for strong organic standards. It wasn't a given that we would have a standard that didn't have GMOs, that didn't have sewage sludge, that didn't have irradiation. We had to fight hard for the organic standards that we have. So that's still a big part of our work. And we also fight the worst practices of industrial agriculture. We have a Millions Against Monsanto campaign, and we spend a lot of our time fighting factory farming and pesticides and genetically modified organisms. But over the years, we learned that organic isn't just the absence of these toxic chemicals or the absence of these horrible factory farms that pile up waste. It's not just that it eliminates the bad things. Farming organically actually develops the soil health. Many people wonder why you have to take 3 years to transition to become an organic farmer, and some assume that that's because it takes 3 years to get the pesticides and chemical fertilizers out of the soil. But in fact, it takes 3 years to build the soil microbiology that creates the healthy soil that produces nutritious food. And that's, in fact, why organic is called organic. It refers to the organic life in the soil, the carbon-based life in the soil that creates the healthy food that is organic food. So Regeneration International focuses on that topic. How do we cool the planet and feed the world? And that's through drawing carbon from the atmosphere, where we have excess CO2. We're way past the dangerous tipping point of 350 parts per million CO2. So we're already experiencing the destabilizing impacts of climate change, climate chaos, and global warming. And we need to figure out ways to draw that carbon out of the atmosphere. Well, what organic farmers know very well is that there's a carbon cycle, and you can, through photosynthesis, you can draw the carbon out of the atmosphere, bring it back into the soil where it aids the soil fertility, which increases yields. It helps the soil hold water, which enables us to make more of the water resources that we have and to increase those water resources. And it really is the solution to the ecology of the earth.
Now, looking at
Alexis,
looking at Regeneration International, how does that relate back to your own organization? Or are these two organizations that relate closely together under two different umbrellas, or under one umbrella?
Well, the Organic Consumers Association is largely a U.S.-based organization. We do have a sister organization in Mexico via Organica, but with Regeneration International, we wanted to put together an international coalition that could bring this issue to the United Nations, and especially on the climate change piece, so that we could get together to advocate for organic as a solution to the climate change problem at the international meetings on climate change. So we partnered up with the International Federation of Organic Agriculture Movements, Navdanya in India. We partnered up with Hans Herren's organization, the Millennium Institute, and many other organizations around the world that are advocating for regenerative farming. And so we created a coalition with Regeneration International that would enable us to do our work on the international scale. And now Regeneration International is its own 501c3 nonprofit.
That's fantastic. Now, you're talking a little earlier about the use of plants in order to draw down the carbon, sequester it in the soil. That also adds to the efficiency, absorption of water, and then the efficiency of using water by the plants. So does that relate directly to this whole notion of food and climate as a direct connection?
That's right. When we initially got involved in climate change, it was with the idea that organic farming could reduce emissions, because by some estimates, industrial agriculture, from deforestation to food waste, is responsible for 57% of global greenhouse gas emissions. And that really makes sense. We're a really packed planet, packed with people, and people are eating 3 meals a day. A lot of our industry and effort and long distance transportation, any aspect that requires fossil fuel use, you can attach that to the food system. Food is our number one product on the planet, and we're spending a lot of our fossil fuels to fuel the food industry. And also the food industry is the reason for deforestation. And again, at the end of this whole chain, we have food waste, where half of the food that's produced using fossil fuel emissions ends up going into the trash in the landfill. So we initially thought of organic, as a local organic especially, as just a way to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And then we became more aware of the carbon cycle and realized that once you do start farming biologically with soil health and soil microbiology as your goal, that process of photosynthesis, drawing the carbon from the atmosphere through the plants and making these exchanges with the soil microbiology for nutrients, this whole cycle that cycles carbon, the Earth is the biggest carbon sink outside of the ocean, which wasn't supposed to be a carbon sink, and of course the atmosphere, which is out of balance now in this cycle. We have too much carbon in the atmosphere, way too much carbon in the oceans, and where all of that carbon originated and belongs is in the soil.
And that's where we need to get it back, and thank you for sharing about that. But looking at, through your organizations, plural, one domestically and the other which covers the globe, about helping people to think about and change the nutrition that they're taking in, and also the diets that they have. And I know this is one of the movements of going to more plant-based food, beans, mushrooms, all types of vegetables, even fruit, through various shrubs and trees. So how do we do that? One, so that people actually are living healthy. We are what we eat is the adage. And at the same time, we're actually addressing climate change and making the earth a much healthier place at the same time.
Well, that's a very important topic to raise. Everyone wants to know, what should we be eating if we care about climate change? And that's exactly how I got started with all of this. When in around 1990, when the Kyoto Protocol was being implemented for the first time, I was a teenager trying to make decisions that would be good for the planet. I heard that the rainforests were being cut down to make way for cattle grazing, and I became a vegetarian. But now that I've learned, it's not that human beings should not eat animals, although I still do not eat animals. But that's not what got us into the crisis that we're in. It's how we've been raising those animals. For instance, only 3% of the land in the United States today is growing human food. 3% of the cropland in the United States is growing human food. That means 97% of the cropland is being used to feed animals and increasingly being used to fuel our vehicles now that we have this ethanol standard where most gas pumps, you can read on the label of the gas pump, it says it's 10% ethanol. Well, that sounds like a good idea until you realize how many fossil fuels go into producing corn. And it's basically a wash. As many fossil fuels go into that corn production as you can get out through ethanol. So that doesn't make much sense. And the way that we're raising animals, especially grazing animals, a cow is meant to eat grass. And then the humans can make nutrition or can access the nutrition from that grass. We can't eat grass ourselves. Cows are specially designed with multiple stomachs to process that nutrition. And so it just doesn't make sense to keep the animals in factory farms, feed them the grain on land that we should be using to eat fruits and vegetables. We're feeding the cows the grain, and then we're making the cows unhealthy, and certainly through the confinement that they're in, but also just from the very fact that we're feeding them grain, something that they can't really digest properly. And that's not the worst thing that a cow eats.
Alexis, we're running out of time. We need to go on to a couple of last two questions here. What are some of the changes that we need to be making for the public, but particularly with policymakers here in the United States Congress, local city councils, county boards of supervisors, so that we're actually using the best of the soil and the best that humans should have? And we have about 15 seconds to answer that, so we got to be quick.
Well, I'll go to my favorite piece of legislation that's in the state legislatures right now. There are a number of bills to support carbon farming and regenerative agriculture, but my favorite is the Hawaii Carbon Farming Tax Credit Bill. And the idea is that if you can show that you are sequestering carbon in your soil, you're increasing the soil organic carbon, you're increasing the soil organic matter, you are pulling carbon out of the atmosphere, putting it into the soil, you can get a tax credit for those farming practices.
Well,
I think that's the direction we need to move.
This is Alexis Baden-Meyer. She's Political Director, Organic Consumers Association, as we create the Emerald Planet.